Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging headfirst into, well, a global phenomenon that really captivated millions. Squid Game. This show just exploded, didn't it? Left a huge mark. But what was it about its core message, that resonated so profoundly we want to go beyond the surface today?
Absolutely. And our mission, really, for this deep dive is to explore how Squid Game can be read through a Marxist lens.
Okay.
So what that means is viewing the show as a potent allegory about capitalism, specifically how it works as a system, often designed to exploit, and then the different ways people react or are sort of forced to react to that.
Right.
We'll be drawing directly from a stack of pretty insightful forces that see the show as this powerful critique of systemic exploitation and, well, what Marxists call false consciousness.
Oh, consciousness. Okay, so that's like the system tricking people.
Exactly. The insidious way a system can convince those it exploits to essentially participate in their own oppression. It's a core idea in this reading.
Gotcha. So get ready, everyone, to see the show in maybe a completely new light. We're going to unpack how different bits of Squid Game function as these powerful metaphors, metaphors for roles and dynamics within a capitalist society. We'll look at the VIPs, those red-suited guards, the players themselves, and how they seem to embody these various responses to a system that, well, according to these interpretations, is inherently rigged.
Yeah, that's the core argument.
Okay, let's start with maybe the most obvious parallel. The VIPs. These decadent masked figures literally betting on human lives just for kicks.
Yeah.
What aspects of how they're shown, according to the sources we looked at, really cement their role as the ruling class? Is it just greed or is it something, deeper?
Well, the analysis we reviewed is pretty crystal clear on this. The VIPs represent the ruling class, the billionaires.
Right.
It's not just their, obscene wealth. It's their absolute detachment, the way they build power and profit directly from the suffering of others. They're completely outside the game's immediate dangers. Totally safe.
Yeah.
Yet they're its ultimate beneficiaries and controllers.
Okay.
This is presented as like the bedrock of the show's anti-capitalist critique. Those at the very top are literally playing games with human lives for amusement, for profit.
Chilling when you put it like that. Okay, so if the VIPs dictate the terms from above, the red suits are the ones down there enforcing them, sometimes with, well, terrifying efficiency. What do our sources say about their symbolic role in this allegory?
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. The reading that emerges is that the red suits are allegorized as the police, or maybe broader, the enforcers within a capitalist system.
Okay. The muscle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They maintain the brutal order of the game, just like state enforcers maintain the capitalist system.
Yeah.
And they get slightly better conditions, right? We see them with better food, shelter.
And the masks give them anonymity, protection.
Protection, yeah, and a sense of power over the players. But here's the key insight from these sources. Despite that elevated status compared to the players, they're ultimately just expendable tools for the VIPs. Their better situation depends entirely on their willingness to violently enforce a system that, isn't ultimately for their benefit either.
So the masks aren't just for intimidation.
The interpretations highlight them as symbolizing a loss of individual morality, a kind of dehumanization that's maybe required to serve the system without asking questions.
Wow. Okay. Now let's turn to the players, the actual participants. There's that pivotal moment really early on where they vote. They choose to stay or leave the game.
A crucial scene.
The sources offer a really compelling take on these groups and then also on the people who ultimately rebel. It really raises fascinating questions about how different parts of society react when they're in an exploitative system.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
The analysis we looked at breaks down those player responses into these distinct allegorical groups. It's quite neat, actually.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Right. So first, the stay voters. These are interpreted, in this Marxist reading, as conservatives or perhaps reactionaries.
Why that label?
Because they're seen as individuals voting against their own immediate self-interest. They choose to continue the deadly game based purely on the promise, the maybe illusion, of a future reward they'll likely never get.
Just piggy bank.
Exactly. The insight here is how deeply ingrained the fear of the unknown, or maybe just change, can be. They cling to the familiar, even if it's lethal, because they fear the perceived chaos of challenging the system.
And they accept the vote itself.
Yes, that's crucial. They actively accept the democratic outcome, which, in this reading, legitimizes their own exploitation. It's like the ultimate psychological trick the game plays, making them feel like they chose this path, makes them complicit.
That's a really powerful point about complicity. Okay, so then we have the Leave voters. They're given a critical interpretation too, labeled as liberals. Can you unpack that connection for us?
Absolutely. And it's important to say the sources use liberals here not necessarily as a value judgment,
Yeah.
but to describe a specific approach. They see the Leave voters as focusing on individual survival, on escaping their immediate bad situation. Much like a liberal political approach might seek reforms within the existing system.
Rather than tearing it down.
Precisely. Rather than fundamentally dismantling it, they vote to escape their specific current exploitation, but only once they have that temporary out. Their goal is individual survival, not systemic change.
And they also accept the vote's legitimacy.
They do. And critically, what happens, they often return to the game later, right?
Yeah, most of them do.
Which demonstrates, according to this analysis, that individual escape, without tackling the root cause, often just leads you right back into the same trap. It's seen as a critique of reformist approaches that don't challenge the core structure of power.
So let me see if I've got this right. The distinction the sources are drawing is that both voting groups, stay and leave, despite seeing things differently, are ultimately still operating within the rules of a system that the ruling class, the VIPs, frames as fair and democratic. They accept its rules, even if it means participating in their own exploitation.
You've got it, exactly. But then we get to the rebels.
Yes.
And these figures are viewed quite clearly in this allegorical reading as leftists or revolutionaries.
Okay.
This is really the heart of the political analysis in these sources. These are the individuals who recognize the VIPs, the system runners, as the true enemy.
Not the other players.
Exactly. They reject the idea that just winning the game, or by analogy, succeeding within capitalism, is liberation. They understand that real freedom means dismantling the game itself.
And the sources noted the violence inherent in that.
They do. They highlight that the show depicts their rebellion as inherently violent, which mirrors some strands of revolutionary socialist thought. The argument being, the system itself is maintained by extreme violence, so resisting it might necessitate violence too.
A difficult point, but part of the analysis.
Yes. And their action is inherently collective. They recognize that individual success, like Di-hun winning the money, is ultimately futile or incomplete without changing the whole system. It's a call to identify the real source of the oppression, the structure itself.
This framework is already incredibly insightful. But you mentioned the sources we reviewed also dive into some important nuances, things that deepen this allegorical reading even more. What else stood out?
Yeah, there are several really key points that add texture. Consider Gi-hun's final choice at the very end.
Right, not getting on the plane.
Exactly. His decision not to get on the plane, but to turn back and confront the game makers, that's seen as crucial. It represents, in this reading, his transition. He goes from being a Leave voter, someone just seeking individual escape with his winnings, to becoming what the sources might call a nascent revolutionary.
Ah, interesting.
He realizes his individual escape is, well, insufficient, maybe even meaningless, while the system itself still exists and keeps hurting others. A powerful moment showing a shift in consciousness.
That makes sense. What else?
Then you have characters like Sabiok and Abdul Ali. Their motivations, you remember, are often tied to very specific, urgent needs, getting family out, sending money home, just basic survival.
Yeah, very grounded reasons.
This shows how material conditions, real desperation, rather than just abstract ideology, can drive people towards radical action. They become key parts of the resistance because of their circumstances. It's not just about grand theories, it's about survival, pushing people to fight back.
Ken, the front man. He's such a compelling, dark figure.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The frontman is complex. He's a former winner, right?
Yeah.
Someone who came from the player's side.
Yeah, he won the game himself.
And now he ruthlessly manages the entire system for the VIPs. This is read as a sharp critique of those elites who might rise from the working class, but then become the most ardent defenders, the most brutal enforcers of the very system that once exploited them.
Like selling out, but on a terrifying scale.
Pretty much. It's almost a warning sign that escaping one level of exploitation doesn't automatically mean freedom. It can trap you in a different, maybe even worse, form of complicity.
That's a really profound observation about him. Okay, and finally, did the sources talk about maybe the limits of this allegory or how specific we should be in applying it?
Yes, that's a crucial point they make. while the core critique of capitalism is seen as very clear and intentional, mapping every single character exactly to specific modern political groups, like saying this person is a specific type of conservative, this one is a specific type of liberal that might be too reductive, too simplistic.
So it's broader than that.
Exactly. The allegory speaks more broadly to general attitudes toward the system. You see compliance based on false hope, you see the desire for individual escape without systemic change, and you see revolutionary rejection. It effectively captures the dynamics of political consciousness within capitalism, these sources argue, rather than offering a perfect one-to-one character match. It's about the larger forces, the different ways people think and act within such a structure.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So bringing this all together, what does this mean for how we view Squid Game? And perhaps stepping back, even how we look at our own world?
Well, this deep dive, really guided by the sources we examine, offers one powerful way, a compelling Marxist lens, to look at Squid Game. It's a perspective, right? And it's one that vividly highlights capitalism, or at least aspects of it, as potentially a violent, exploitative system structured primarily for the benefit of a detached ruling class. It really throws that concept of false consciousness into sharp relief, how the system might convince the exploited to participate in their own oppression. And it underscores the crucial role of enforcers in maintaining that whole structure.
And perhaps most importantly, this particular interpretation emphasizes the futility, maybe, of seeking just reform or purely individual escape within such a system if you accept the premise, without addressing its fundamental mechanics. It suggests that the only way, in this view, to truly end these kinds of games is through a collective recognition of the true enemy, the system, the structure, and ultimately the dismantling of the system itself.
It's a potent allegory for our times, definitely. It captures through this lens the show's devastating critique of the pressures of modern economic systems, late-stage capitalism, as some call it, and those various forms of complicity and resistance we see playing out within them.
So as you, our listener, reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider this. In your own life, in the systems you participate in, do you sometimes see echoes of these roles? Do you find yourself acting like a stay voter, maybe a leave voter, or perhaps becoming a rebel in your own understanding? Something to think about.